Yes.
But this,
Happy to help.
I want to kind of softly get into the book for just in this way, because you obviously the book is set in the American South, right? But it's not a big leap for some people to think it's set in New Orleans. Is New Orleans the setting of the book?
Well, I guess yes and no. The thing about it is that I was inspired by many different writers. We mentioned Ralph Ellison, but it's also that book Lolita by Nabokov.
Yeah.
Classic, maybe the most controversial book of all time. And as a young writer, I was reading, and you just sort of pick up things. You're like, what if I tried this idea? And initially, the book was very firmly set in our New Orleans. But I sort of recognized that New Orleans is such a special place and so specific that sometimes the setting can get in the way of what you're trying to do in the story. I didn't want people saying, how could they like get on a streetcar and then get off here and there's no Superdome right there at the corner, that sort of thing. So I just sort of pulled all of those details out of it. And I want to make it more universal so that people who are not, don't know the city very well, they'll go, well, it's the South probably, but it could be like, Baton Rouge or Atlanta or something like that. And that's on them. I think for us, we know it's New Orleans, and I'm fine with that. For me, it makes it more fun.
As I was looking at the book, it jumped out at me a statistic that I actually just read not too long ago from a group out of New York, Brooklyn, that studies incarceration. And the statistic, and please don't cite this, but it's very close to this, that Black males make up about 26% of the population of New Orleans, but they make up 82% of the incarcerated population of New Orleans. And that's one of the things I couldn't help but see coming out of the pages between the lines of the book is this the allusions to that same kind of environment. Am I reading too much into that, or does that resonate?
No, I mean, look, it's a huge through line in the life of our city. I've had it pointed out to me by people over the years. I remember I went to a luncheon with Mitchell Andrew talking about that. And he was talking about when he was a young man in the 70s, the stats were not that much different for incarceration rates and certain criminal statistics. And, the way I look at it is it sort of doesn't matter to me how you view crime or race or history. It's a sign that something's not quite right in a community when you have those kind of numbers. Because it's not the same, for example, for Black folks in Atlanta, for example, or even in Detroit, or even in New York, for example. So it's something very specific about our community, but we have all these wonderful things that make us special and strong and resilient. Yet there's this one sort of aspect we have to work on, and it takes us all together sort of recognizing these things to come to solutions for these problems.
So getting to the book, I read a lot of comments about the book from people that they didn't really care for the narrator too much, right? And mostly because he's a flawed person. He's imperfect, right? And it's his imperfection in his pursuit or in his defense of the love of his son, which is just, I don't think anyone could deny it, that leads him down some destructive past. Is the narrator a good guy?
He's a person. And like all people, he's complicated.
Yeah.
And he's affected by the circumstances that he's in. I think you're correct. He absolutely loves his son. He loves his wife. He loves his mother. He loves his friends. I think you could definitely point your finger and, know his flaws and say what things he's done that he shouldn't have done in the book. Without being too political, if he had been charged with a crime, I would pardon him myself. I think that I blame more like the situation. And anybody who's been in a situation where they feel less than could know what I'm talking about. Whether you feel disrespected as a woman or as a minority or somebody with a disability or whatever it is, that sometimes you're sort of backed into a corner. You have to behave a certain way to assert your individuality and your dignity.
Yeah, that gets. And by the way, this is no holds barred, so that if you have to say something that you think might be political, that's fine too. This is a very welcoming group, and we want them to be challenged, right? And that's part of it. In fact, I was challenged not long ago when I got a text from someone. It was an article that was in the Washington Post that says during eras like we found ourselves in this whole 2020, that Black people feel the pain and white people turn to book clubs, which really kind of hit home because this is one of the ways that we're talking through some issues. And but I think it's vitally important for us as we try to move our system, and more importantly, the mission of this system forward in addressing some challenges that have faced our state for a long time. And a lot of it goes back to identity. There was a line that you had that in the book, talking about the narrator, that probably stuck out to me more than anything else and defined him more, and I guess made him more redeeming to me than anything else, when he said, "The cup clanging against the bars of my mind." Mm. And what a visual that creates. I happened to just watched a prison movie last night, and those were coming to mind as well. But just think about, we've all seen that, right? When the prisoners bang. Talk to me a little bit about how you come up with these ways of creating images that transport the reader to that area, and then how does it help you with delivering the message of the book?
Yeah, well, it's just it's a lot of practice. I think that art and literature and sports and fashion design, these things all have connections where the more you do it, the more confident you feel. I know that when I was a young student, undergrad at UNO, I would often read wonderful books that my professors would assign to me. And I would literally think to myself, I don't understand how this is happening, and I don't understand what it all means. I'm sort of missing the big picture. By the time I got to grad school and was reading more books that I was being assigned, I was kind of going, oh, I think I do kind of understand this. And after grad school, I was able to apply a lot of things that I learned from these classes to my own writing. I came to understand, for example, that I am pretty good, I've been told, with metaphors, for example. And so I can sort of lean into that sort of poetic mindset. And I tend to be drawn to writers who use great images, and to poets like the young lady who spoke at the inauguration yesterday, who can just sort of make you feel something so visceral. And so, for me, I often say that when I write a story or a book, it's like character acting. I feel like I'm inside of this person's life. That they're a real person with real problems, and I care about them, and I'm seeing the world through their eyes. And it is one of the great things about being a writer, is that I get to live different lives, frequently. It's not just something that I do every once in a while. And so when I'm in his head, I'm thinking, this is a man who feels in prison, and this is somebody who, like, I've seen those prison movies myself also. And I think that one of my personal greatest fears is that, I'm not a lawbreaker any more than anybody else, but I would feel so terrified to be in jail. And I think for him, he feels that way mentally and emotionally, thanks to this sort of increased level of, racism he's experiencing in this environment.
And that he's willing to go to all ends, even sometimes playing a minstrel type role, yes, right? To gain acceptance, so that he ultimately can protect Nigel from having the same experience.
Yes.
But yet denying Nigel's identity in the process, which was just, it was heartbreaking at times. And it leads me to something a little bit contemporary, an event that just recently occurred, that you also, I know you started writing this in 2012. So it was before the pandemic, before the last administration, certainly before the insurrection of January 6th. But I think it hints at the timelessness of this piece of work, because it's supposedly set in the future. I'm not so sure it's set in the future. It might be set contemporaneously. Maybe it's a future of 2012. But the narrator's talking about the wife, and he says she knew the value of dismantling systemic injustice. But when it came to the basics of walking through life as prey, she had no idea. And that was one of those moments that I really had to sit down and just think through, because we want to be empathetic, right? And we want to be parts of the solution. But so many of us, especially people that look like me, have never fully come to terms with the basics of walking through life as prey. Can you talk about that for a minute, and what that means, and certainly in the book, but also what it means for young Black males today that are walking down our streets and on the streets of our campuses?
Yeah, sure. And I meant to say at the outset, Dr. Henderson, thank you for doing this. And I want to give a shout out to Ryan Bell also for being involved in making this happen. You made a comment earlier about the mission of universities. And I can tell you, I'm a former corporate lawyer. I've traveled a lot. I even once had the occasion to go up to Yale. And I remember I had an experience. I won't get too deep into it now because it's a long story, but I remember thinking that sometimes the universities don't reach out to their communities. They're not fulfilling their mission. They're not having that conversation with their own people in their own land. And I think that UNO has been good at that traditionally, and I think this is all part of that. So I'm so happy to be a part of this discussion. So thank you for that. I think that this experience of being prayed, as said in the book, it's not a new experience. People often wonder, like, in the past year, I've gotten a lot of comments since the George Floyd related protest. You know, Maurice, you're tired of being right all the time, or how do you keep on, like, how did you write this before these things happened? And for me, it's almost like um, these racially related injustices are so um, a part of the American fabric. It's almost like a holiday. I'm not trying to be flip about it, but like you could take a story like A Christmas Carol, which is a great story we all know very well. You could remake that story as a film or a TV show, almost every year with different characters in a slightly different, place, different time, and yet the essence of the story is always there. When I have characters in the backstory of this novel, launch an assault on like this shopping mall or launch an assault on some monument, I'm just looking at American history. I'm saying, well, these things have happened so many times in the name of some pretty dark things, and so it's just a matter of me having read history, of having talked to my ancestors, of having listened and watched and appreciated these things. And um, one thing I can say that is that New Orleans, as wonderful as we are, in some sense, I've noticed in my travels, we are sometimes more segregated than a lot of other towns are. And what that meant to me was this: I grew up in New Orleans East, like Sarah Broom, who was an author who won National Book Award last year. New Orleans East is a very black suburb. Um, I mean, it just is. So what it meant is that my experience growing up out there in mostly black subdivision, going to black schools, I actually didn't really experience a lot of these things personally myself. I didn't see like a lot of, people with, whatever, like Confederate flags walking around, that kind of thing when I grew up. It wasn't until I became an adult and had more interactions across cultures, as it were, within the city, being a lawyer, going to different schools, I was kind of like, wow, so this is what's happening. And it forced me to sort of learn more about it. So in a strange way, even as a black man from the South, I had to make a decision to learn a lot of things, to understand what I was seeing. So that if I saw something that seemed a little off between two other people, I would go, oh, I bet that's why that's happening. And I might even ask those people, the person who experienced the aggression, hey, what just happened? How did you feel about it? And ask the other person, why'd you say that? What was motivating what you just said to that person? And so I just think that I try to not personally be like smug and kind of go to like my white brothers and sisters. Oh, you don't understand. You people are all so evil. I kind of go, look, if you just like pay more attention, if you get more education, if you think more about it and put yourself into people like my shoes, that's a benefit for all of us. And whatever your morality is, whether it's religion and Christianity or a certain philosophy or just being a good parent, a good friend, you can do these things for yourself, for our community. And that's why I write where I write.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. A lot of us were struck at the let me rephrase that. Not enough of us were struck by the distance, by the difference in the way that Washington D.C. looked in June of this year when they were preparing for demonstrations, and the way Washington D.C. looked on January 6th and preparing for a demonstration. And again, it's not a big leap to assume that there's some bias in, maybe it's unconscious, maybe it's conscious bias in the planning associated with that. When you get the feeling that, maybe some folks planning said, well, these are good law-abiding white folk that'll be in DC.
Well, those code words, hardworking Americans, I mean, that's always a code word. Or evangelicals is a code word. I come from a faith tradition myself. My grandmother was a treasurer at the church. I grew up in the church. But when people say evangelical, they never really mean black. If they say hardworking American, they don't really mean black. And so there's these little code words that exist. Yeah. You can see it so much, but yes.
And so, I can make that observation, but it still doesn't have quite the same impact on me. And I can try to understand it. And we have a great faculty member at Southeastern who's a member of our Management Leadership Institute cohort this year, named Elizabeth Hornsby. And we were talking about this as part of our group, I guess last week. And she was able to take all of these jumbled thoughts or these things that I kind of felt maybe intuitively or wanted to put into words. She put them in words in a way that struck me so deeply that I felt like I had a deeper understanding. That's what you do in the book, is that you make things so compelling, sometimes raw, sometimes irreverent references that pop in at the moment you least expect it. So if you're not reading ahead and you're reading at the same time that you're mentally reading at the same time your eyes are reading, it jars you. Is that intentional? Are you trying to get the reader to see something bigger, or are you trying just to make a compelling story?
I think that this is going to sound strange, but I've never even said this out loud, but I've thought about this. Yeah. In some ways, the book is also inspired by It's a Wonderful Life, which to me is one of the great books about human nature, where you have this person who's basically willing to throw away his own life because he feels like he's worthless. There's something about Jimmy Stewart as an actor. He's so sort of like fatherly and so brotherly and so kind and so nice. When I wrote this book and how I try to act in my life is that I don't try to pass too much judgment on people. I just try to, I don't want to like sound like I'm being arrogant about it, but I almost think that like all of us in a certain sense are like, we're still children. Even if you're grown up, even if you're a responsible person, you pay a mortgage, you have your own children, we're still kind of those little like 9-year-olds in the playground somewhere. And so when many of the things happen in the book and the book says something really like sort of jarring and out of the way, it's just commenting on what's actually happening without trying to put a slant on it. It's just saying, look at these little kids acting like little kids. They don't even recognize how immature they're acting right now. And unfortunately, racism in our society is so complex, but you can almost boil it down to words like it's about snobbery. It's about thinking that you're better than somebody else. It's about trying to protect your own power. It's about trying to put somebody else down. And so these things, to me, can be simplified through this, through the parts in the book where it's somewhat humorous. To me, it's not even humor. It's just honesty. Just saying, hey, this is what's really going on. And often in politics, they say, politicians only get in trouble when they tell the truth by mistake. That's the funniest things they say, those truthful statements. So the book's kind of like that also.
Yeah. When you said that you like your job, I like my job is so black. The police planted evidence in it. I can't ever get away with saying that, but that's how I drink my coffee. And it was one of those things that I said, man, that's the coolest thing I've read in a while. And
that was a Twitter line.
Yeah.
I used to have a satirical Twitter account. I would like just tell these off the wall jokes, just to have fun with myself, and like I got to put that in the book. That's a pretty good one.
That's a great one. Well, so I've got a list. I can't print it yet because I'm still trying to work in the public sector in a respectable way. But I've got a list of things called chwonts, and those are the tweets that have popped to my mind that I dare not put out in public. And so when I finish it, that's going to be my book. It's just this list of chwonts. And
I love it.
Thankfully, I've got PR people that keep me off the ledge and keep me in a good place. But that's got to be a liberating place to be as an author, and especially an author in your position. In 21st century, we have all these tools available. You've got this rich canon of literature you can draw upon, but yet you can get to some of the more obscure things. And so I'm put you on the spot because we didn't prep for any of this. I know that Ellison is an influence. I know that Faulkner is an influence. Who are influences on you that possibly we don't know as much about? Because all of us have read these works, right? But
right.
Who else is there that we should?
Oh my goodness! I mean, there's so many. I'll tell you the most embarrassing one. It's the author of the X-Men comics from 1975 until 1994. His name was Chris Claremont. Came to America as a 25-year-old British person and wrote those comics where he basically invented characters like Storm and Colossus and Wolverine and made it so exciting. And now it's $1 billion franchise in the world. I grew up reading those. My mom would bring me to the bookstore once a week and I'd get my little brown bag of comics and go home and read them. I loved Chris Claremont's writing so much because he was such a humane writer. And a lot of comics was often, Biff Boomback and have a fight with some alien person and yada, yada, yada. He always would slow things down and like show you, for example, Wolverine and Storm like having a slice of pie together before they go out on the X Fight or whatever like that and have their thing. So that's always stuck with me that you could have a work that is considered, dystopian or satirical or whatever, and yet the people are still really people. There's a beating heart beneath the entire storyline. And so I've always kept that in my heart with everything I do, whether it's a story like this or my short stories that are coming out later in the year.
Yeah. So some of those small things that you seem almost like are ancillary to the story, but yet they're absolutely vital to putting the flavor on the story.
Yeah, a little bit of lanyard.
Yeah, a little lanyard. That's right. Good New Orleans word. I've got to ask you because you're a teacher and because you're involved in our work, and we view ourselves as change agents, and we view ourselves as a progressive part of what we do. Is this book a prediction of the future? Is it a cautionary tale? And if so, is it inevitable that that's the future that we realize?
I think that it is all of the above. I'm not trying to cop out. But the way I see it is that, some of us have chronic diseases that kind of flare up from time to time. It's something as simple as a rash. It sort of comes back every year or so, and you have to deal with it. And I really feel that some of our worst impulses in America are like that. I think that most people alive today are not used to seeing like insurrection, which had these weird mixtures of racism and terrorism and anti-democratic origins and yada, yada, yada. And you've seen those kind of things happen since like the Shays Rebellion, back in like the 1790s in the country. I mean, these things have been happening forever and forever and forever. And so I think that America's strength is also its weakness, and that's normal. Whatever our strengths are is also our weaknesses. We are the most diverse nation in the world. We are founded on the idea not of like blood and bone, but on this ideology of freedom for everybody. We started out at a pretty low point where, blacks couldn't vote, women couldn't vote, non-landowners couldn't vote. We've been improving the entire time. And so I just think that we'll sort of always have some version of these problems. We can get under control. We can make it so that the top note, the key signature, if you will, is the shining city on the hill that we all love so much. And I think that hopefully, this period, we've hit the peak of it, and now things are going to sort of level out somewhat. We'll get back to the business of being just good people who love our families and want to have decent jobs and decent health care, and we'll go on with our lives.
And then another peak will emerge at some time in the future. Folks, I know I wish we had 2 hours to talk, and unfortunately our time was limited. I do want to make this recommendation to all of the folks that are participating with us. Mr. Ruffin is not only does not just write novels. He's got a great curriculum vitae of essays and opinion pieces that are absolutely extraordinary. And as I was a journalism English major as an undergrad who had visions of becoming the next great William Raspberry or George Will or William Buckley, whoever you want to pick, and write great opinion pieces. He has written some invited op-eds for a number of publications that are some of the best writing I've ever seen. And I intend to complete your whole catalog of writing sometime in the near future. But I would certainly love to continue this conversation in multiple formats. And I can't thank you enough for, number one, the work that you do every day, but for gracing us with this conversation this evening. You're magnificent.
Thank you for having me. And just remember, everybody, when it's time for us to fight on behalf of each other, let's show up for the fight, and we can keep on being the best version of ourselves.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Ruffin, very, very much. Ryan?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Henderson. I'm going to hand the floor over now quickly to Lisa Van Hoos, who is a member of the 4th cohort of M&LI. She's going to announce the next selection for the next book group. Lisa?
Good evening, everyone. So wanted to start off with asking a few questions. And it is, did you know that Louisiana has the highest imprisonment rate per 100,000 people in the United States? And did you know that only 24% of persons in federal prisons have received any post-secondary or college education compared to 48% of people in the general population? And although prison education is available, we do know that some will seek post-secondary education after serving their sentences. And the data does suggest that higher education, educational opportunities in any setting are the key to reducing crime. And so because of those facts, the 4th cohort has selected 13th, which is a documentary by the award-winning Ava DuVernay that examines the prison industrial complex and the impact of mass incarceration. And so it tells a story that is directly related to both our system's strategic framework, and it also talks to our efforts to develop inclusive cultures where everyone can feel welcome, and as our esteemed speaker just said, so that we can all have the skills to be able to show up when it's time to fight for others. And so the fourth cohort believes that this documentary provides a great platform to discuss how we can address the benefits, needs, and the risk of providing educational opportunities for these individuals on our campuses, but also the lessons that might enlighten beyond that focus. So we're asking that you view the documentary before April 15th, which is our next UL System Book Club, when we'll meet at 5:30. And the documentary is located on Netflix, which is generously agreed to allow for educational screenings. And so please pay attention to, there is some terms of agreement, and the Netflix policy the link should also be in the chat for you to access. And so we ask that you think about hosting a watch party on your campus or even within your working groups to take an opportunity to be able to broaden your conversations. And so we're excited about the discussion on April 15th. And on behalf of our cohort, we are looking forward to continuing our efforts to manifest meaningful change throughout our systems. Thank y'all, everybody.
Thanks, Lisa. Now we're all going to join our respective breakout rooms. This is going to happen automatically, so just be patient. I would like to also say that after the breakout discussion, we are automatically going to rejoin this large group and spend about 20 minutes speaking more specifically about the text. That will be an opportunity for all of the attendees. If you have questions or comments that you'd like to make directly to Mr. Ruffin, he will be there to speak with us about the novel. So everybody sit tight. They're gonna hit a magic button and you're all gonna be sent into breakout rooms.